welcome to Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly public news show with commentary. And this is your guest host this week and normal co-host. We hope to have Bob Weeks here back, but I'm Karl Peterjohn. Our guest this week is Andy Hooser from KQAM Radio. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
I appreciate it. Great to be back with you, Karl.
Well, actually, I'm not sure which hat I should refer to you in terms of wearing, because you kind of expanded your background a little bit in terms of your media coverage. Let's talk about that for a minute going in before we start dissecting some of the local public affairs activities, but some of the changes you're involved in at the moment.
I guess we can say that this is the ultimate conservative movement in the state of Kansas. Obviously we're still on KQAM with Steckline Communications, actually the first hour broadcasting on the western part of the state with our sister stations out in Garden City and Dodge City, and even down in Guyman, Oklahoma. So we have the radio cover quite a bit, but we've just started working with Great Plains TV with KGPT, and they're broadcasting our show live every morning as well on channel 2610 through the InfoWars network there as well. So you get us live every morning 6 to 9 on the TV along with radio, and a replay of it from 6 to 9 at night every evening as well. So we're trying to get the word out the best we can, and it seems to be working well so far. Well,
that's absolutely helpful information, because I think that's been one of the real challenges in today's environment in terms of media, and some media is up and other media is down. And I was curious in terms of how you're viewing things at this point in terms of an alternate way of getting the conservative message out in Kansas compared to what's going on nationally. There's a lot of national outlets, primarily on the internet. Of course, a lot of people attribute Fox News. I think if you're looking at resources like Newsmax and other resources out there that are actually really conservative media, and I think Fox actually, to a significant degree, is fair and balanced.
For the most part, it's all about exposure. I mean, we have, like you mentioned, so many media outlets between TV, between the recorded stuff like Netflix, between internet, between radio, between online podcasts, between just social media together. There's so many different outlets right now that the only way that we can try and expand the best we can is to be on as many platforms as we can. And that's why it's really cool. I love working with Great Plains TV and with KGP TV to be able to make this happen on the TV side, with what we're doing with Steckline Communications, with the radio station, with our Facebook Live feed every day. We're trying to be on all the platforms, and I don't know another local market that's doing this. We see the national guys doing it. They put their TV hosts on to radio and vice versa, so that way they can try and simplify and consolidate their networks and everything. But when it comes to a local market, and not only local, but two privatized companies, private companies, not big conglomerates and corporations, to try something like this, it's really, really cool to be in the middle of it and watch how much it's growing, the potential that we can have with it. So it's unique, it's different, especially for a local market. I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Well, let me throw out, Wichita Liberty has been, actually I think started out as a website when Bob Weeks did it, and we've been on this station for over 3 years, and have been able to kind of have a cross synergy in that regard. Can you, in terms of where you all are going next in terms of internet, podcasts, all that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I got the podcast that I upload every day after the show. And that's just VOR, the show's The Voice of Reason, VOR.podbean.com. You can also subscribe to it on your iTunes, where it automatically downloads every day on your iTunes, if you have that. The Facebook Live, it's on KQAM's Facebook page, facebook.com, 1480 KQAM, and you can see the videos of there, usually about 2 weeks at a time. We always have to clean them up, but the video's there. And then, of course, now on TV.
Clean them up. What do you mean by that?
Clean them up. Well, exactly.
This
trying to stay organized. Exactly. Clean them up a little bit. Well, it's just every couple of weeks to make sure we don't bog down our profiles with all the videos for months at a time. We usually keep about 2 weeks worth of the podcast video of the Facebook Live on the Facebook pages. But then now on TV as well, now that you can watch it live and pre-taped and delayed in the afternoons from 6 to 9. I mean, there's really no excuse not to watch the show or listen to the show now, because we're all over the place. So that way we can start getting the information we need for the state of Kansas.
Well, that's a real challenge in this day and age, especially with the news situations in terms of what's going on in Topeka. I think we're going to save that, getting into the Topeka side of the equation, for a different at a different point, Andy. But let me, before we leave the TV, radio, and internet platforms at this point, let me get your response to the idea in terms of what's next beyond. Can you see anything else on the horizon beyond what we've talked about so far?
Well, I mean, we're talking about potentially more TV stations and more radio stations. So, I mean, within the state of Kansas, it could potentially be growing pretty quickly in that sense. But other opportunities, then we'll have to see. I mean, there's always stuff floating around, and I'll never miss an opportunity like that as long as we can get the information out. So, but as of right now, I mean, we're talking about more TV markets, we're talking about more radio markets. And the farther we can expand in the state of Kansas, the more info we can get out to more viewers and listeners, and make sure that they know what's going on in Topeka and all around the state of Kansas with their legislators.
Well, at this, we're going to have to take our first break. This is Karl Peterjohn with our host this week, KQAM's Andy Hooser. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly news and commentary program looking at issues here in South Central Kansas. Your guest host this week, Karl Peterjohn, that's me, and I'm here with KQAM's Andy Hooser. Andy, we talked about in the first segment how the media is changing.
Sure.
Yesterday, when, and this is getting into the news side, this will be broadcast a couple days from now, but President Trump had awards for fake news, and at the top of his list was, I think, the rather debunked economist. He's a Nobel Prize winner, which I think says how things are deteriorating in Scandinavia. Paul Krugman was at the top of the list. I was curious, I frankly have a lot of concerns about the Kansas news media in general, and I was curious if you had any thoughts at all in terms of what's going on in terms of trying to provide credible news to the public out there in
well, that's
this
why
ideological age that we live in.
Sure, that's why why the show's growing so as big as it is and as quick as it is. Because right now, the only sources that I know that cover these state legislative issues is a little bit from the Associated Press and the local newspapers, the Topeka Capital Journal, the Wichita Eagle, which nothing against them. They cover what they can and as they can, but they have that mainstream media spin to it.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned the Associated Press. There was a story out this week from the AP basically talking about how President Trump is seeking credit for Obama's economic recovery.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sitting here going, what sort of moonshine is coming out of what used to be? The Associated Press is as bad as the East Coast papers and the national broadcast outlets.
And that's why we are sick and tired of hearing that, and we can see the way the mainstream media treats President Trump at the federal level is the same way the majority of the mainstream media treats Governor Brownback and the conservatives at the statewide level. And that's why this show's doing so well on radio and on TV and on online and everything else, because people want the different information. I follow some of these on social media, and the headlines that they put up as their front page on their website and the headline that they share on their social media is the editorial opinion pieces from their writers, not from the actual news articles. So they're trying to push an opinion agenda, and we're calling it out. We're trying to give the alternative, saying that if we don't like Governor Brownback, then let's look at the reasons why, as opposed to just thinking that he hates puppy dogs and children. Let's look at his actual policies. Let's figure out why the Supreme Court for 10 years now has tried to advocate for more spending for education. We've given them more spending for education over the last 10 years, 1% to 2% increases every single year, but yet the teachers still have not gotten pay raises, or that we're still cutting different programs from the schools. Why is this happening, and how much do they actually want? These are the things that we got to talk about.
Well, the school finance litigation, I hate to say it, goes back to the last century.
Sure.
And I wish it was only the last 10 years. But
and you'll never hear it in the mainstream media. They try to give an editorial for a conservative, and then they'll have 3 editorial opinion pieces after it to shred them and tear them apart and tell them how bad they are. So you don't get the true, fair, and balanced in our statewide media. That's why what we try and do on the show is present what they're doing, debunk it, and give you the real facts for you to make your own decision. If you still don't agree with me, I love dialogue on the show and debates on it from people that call in and want to argue, and that's totally fine, but we need to at least discuss the issues realistically, rather than saying that President Trump by default is a racist and Governor Brownback by default hates children. I'm sick and tired of hearing that.
And I think there are a lot of people out there who would agree with that opinion, and I'm one of them. But this is a commentary show, so and news-wise, we have newsmakers on the program. In fact, we've invited a wide range, although there's a a more narrow group that often comes in, and some of the stuff we try and do is informational in nature, which I know you all try and do at KQAM also. Speaking of stories that aren't covered, one of the things that I've thought is really interesting that hasn't gotten the attention that I think it deserves is the fact that when we raised state taxes last year, and we've got a federal income tax cut. This is the exact reverse of what happened about the time that when Governor Brownback, shortly after Governor Brownback was elected, and I basically learned, in my opinion, that presidents trump governors. And I don't mean Trump as a pun, but in the bridge sense.
Well, it's true. Governor Brownback passed the tax breaks back in 2012, the same time Obama was passing tax increases at the federal level, killed the national economy. We're trying to go through the recession. It was the worst recovery from a recession ever, because Barack Obama did what he did, and that killed the agricultural, all the industries that we have in the state, from agriculture to aviation to whatever else we have here. Now we're doing the opposite, to where we're going to see the benefits nationwide from the Trump economy, and then we're going to start to stifle it in the state by raising our own taxes and punishing corporations in the state. And then the little bit of growth that we do see, then the progressives are going to come back and say, oh, look, our recovery and our economy is better than what Brownback's was, because we saw better economic growth when the national economy is doing well, which means the agriculture is going to start coming back. Aviation's already starting to come back. All these new industries that are wanting to move here, they're benefiting from the federal stuff, while the state's going to take credit for it by higher taxes and saying that their high taxes actually worked. It's going to be pathetic, but at the same time, I just read a story a couple of days ago how Kansas was number 38 in the country in 2017 for the number of U-Haul trips migrating from one state to another. We're number 38 for growth in the country, showing that people don't want to come here. So we need to look at ways that actually do incentivize them, and higher taxes is not going to do it.
Well, let's keep that thought in mind, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly show on Kansas, Wichita, and national news commentary. This is your guest host, Karl Peterjohn. I'm here this week with KQAM's Andy Hooser. We were talking taxes a little bit. We were talking government. You mentioned the fact that we're in this interesting situation where the Kansas economy is starting to pick up. And I think we'd pick up faster if we hadn't had the income tax increases, and we actually had two.
Sure. One
was July 1 last year, and one was January 1 this year. Focus in on me, Andy, in terms of, besides the moving van trend, what else do you see in terms of the tea leaves?
Well, right now, we saw over the last couple of years, because of the LLC tax breaks, not the loophole, and we need to correct that again. That's what the media has done for us all the time as well, is, the LLC loophole. It's not a loophole. Congress passed it. The governor signed it. It was an incentive. It's not some kind of shenanigan they're getting away with. But because of that loophole for the employment for the LLCs, 80% of the job growth we did see over the last few years was credited to the LLCs. Well, and the pass-through income tax.
The irony I think about this is the Wichita City Council just within the last couple of weeks approved a whole bunch of what they call community improvement districts, but basically it was cities providing subsidies supposedly for blighted areas.
Sure.
Now the one that I think got the most money, we're talking millions of dollars in terms of special benefits, was way out on the east side, I think on Greenwich and I think 13th. Mm-hmm. And we're in a situation where if we're going to provide breaks, the Brownback approach of providing breaks to everyone and having a level playing field, in my view, is a lot better than, the picking winners and losers by the city council or the county commission. Let me add, and that was something I really struggled with when my 8 years on the county commission. I really wanted to get tax breaks for everybody and not have a situation where you pick winners and losers and the problems of crony capitalism as I view it. And I know there's folks in the community, in the business community, who are comfortable with that crony capitalism model, but I don't think it works nationally. But
well, we need to figure out as well, too, as a state, on what we want our revenue source to be from for the state government. Right now, 52, 53, 54% of the sales or the tax revenue in the state comes from sales tax. Only like 30% of it comes from personal income tax, and then whatever else comes from business corporate taxes. So if we want to have the majority of it come from sales tax, let's get rid of the income tax and go to a fair tax with straight sales tax and keep the rates at what they're at right now. If we're going to keep a property tax or an income tax on there at a relatively high rate, then let's start reducing the sales tax rate so that way we can actually afford groceries once in a while, so you're not trying to get us on both ends of it. We really need to
But
look
Kansas has gone in the wrong direction because we just raised income tax rates.
Exactly.
And we
never lowered the sales tax rate.
We have high sales taxes. We're one of the few states with a sales tax on groceries.
Absolutely.
And you combine that with the fact that we're one of the few states with a statewide property tax. It's 21.5 mils at the moment, and that's not an insignificant amount. It doesn't show up on most of the state revenues, but it still generates a lot of money in Topeka.
And that's why we went the wrong direction in this, because the legislature, the conservatives, let me correct that, not just Republicans, but conservatives, tried to do a 1% sales tax reduction last session. It didn't go through. They wanted their money. They wanted their money. Now we did, as you mentioned, a retroactive tax starting July 1 last year. So when you file your taxes in April in a couple of months, you're going to owe a crap ton of state money. Now we saw another tax increase come January 1, which hopefully was offset by the Trump tax cuts, but at the same time, they're getting more money again. We're raising the income tax rates while we kept the sales tax rates up at the same height. Pretty soon, they're going to have all of our money, and then they're going to say, we need more because we didn't get enough of your tax rates.
Well, that's kind of the New York, New Jersey, California tax models.
I mean, when are we going to start doing the big gulp taxes? Yeah, when are we going to see a 30% sales tax on big gulps because they need that to be able to fund more education funding and tell the kids, don't eat a lot of sugar because it's going to make you fat and we have an obesity rate. But by the way, your sales tax that you ate on those big gulps is going to pay for that brand new school again. Come on.
Well, when it comes to raising taxes, there is definitely a tax and spend culture. But I'd like to focus back in on, with the Trump tax cuts, I saw a recent post about Amazon looking for a new headquarters and Apple spending $350 billion, B as a boy billion, to investing in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting, I thought, in terms of the Amazon story, they've got 20 communities that they're looking at, and none of them, Wichita is not one of them. Any thoughts?
Well, it would be nice if we were on a list like that. I mean, we kind of threw out the idea of the Tyson plant a little while ago, which could have brought in some more jobs and some more revenue. The good thing is that we have Aerosystems coming in to try and reinvest, or at least seeing some of that money come in. But it'd be really nice if industries looked at the state of Kansas to bring their industry to our state to reinvest into it, to create some jobs and do some great things. I mean, you mentioned the Trump tax cuts. How many businesses did we see want to give $1,000 bonuses to their employees because of the opportunity to do so? How many
some are 2,000 and more. I mean, it's
exactly.
not just
or even
1,000.
openly want to raise their minimum wage for them, not by government standards, but just by their on their own accord. Why can't we have a piece of that pie in the state? Because we're disincentivizing them and telling them not to come here.
Well, that said, no, we're going to have to take another break for Wichita Liberty TV. This is your guest host, Karl Peterjohn. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. This is your guest host, Karl Peterjohn, here with KQAM's Andy Hooser. We've been talking about local issues, federal issues. Let's talk about one of the things this week. One of the fellows who I think is part of the problem in Topeka is our black-robed legislator, our Chief Justice Lawton Nuss gave his State of the Judiciary, and he's talking about how the courts need more money in Kansas. Andy, do you think there's any hope that Nuss will take off his black robe and decide to run for state office this year?
No, wouldn't it? You'd think so, though. You'd think that he'd be campaigning right now, talking about all the money that we need for the state. That he's one of the legislatures advocating for part of the budgetary process and the power of the purse. No, he came out and not only have they talked about the $600 to $1.5 billion in additional spending for education, but now they've come out and said that they need another increase for salaries for the Supreme Court and for the judiciary system for the state. Now, if you remember, we gave them a 2.5% increase in salaries last year because they came out and said the same thing. And it reminds me of, being the bully on the playground, that when you kick the kid that's down all the time and he never fights back, you're going to keep kicking him because you have the power to do so. If the legislature doesn't stand up to the Kansas Supreme Court at some point, draw the line in the sand and say you no longer have the right to tell us that we need more money, to advocate how much money that we need, and then to ask for more salary hikes at the same time when we're in a budgetary crisis, then we're going to continue to go through this every single year. It's like an employee coming to a business owner and saying, hey, I know that the business is struggling right now. I know that you're about to close your doors because you're struggling and you can't get your product out the door, whatever, but I need a $2 an hour raise on my hourly wage because I'm struggling and my family can't pay my bills. So I need a raise. Can you help me out even though I know your business is struggling? That's the situation we're in at the statewide level right now. After we give them a 2.5% increase, they're asking for more. I don't know anybody that's gotten a salary increase 2 years in a row because the business is doing that well right now in the economy.
And the irony is that you've got the school district attorneys who are suing on behalf of the school districts,
right,
saying, well, if you have to cut state spending 18% in all the other departments to give us more money, well, that's your problem, not. And
exactly.
I wonder how that would play if it comes with judicial expenditures.
Yeah, exactly. Gee, I wonder. So yeah, them advocating for more money there. I mean, we have odds and ends that we need to take care of. We've been in a budgetary constraint for the last few years. Not necessarily Governor Brownback's fault, no matter what some believe, but we have from the corrections facilities and paying the corrections officers appropriately, from working on highway projects, which. Remember, we're still number 3 in the country for best quality state highways. We're not in the shambles that they said we were in. We are paying just over $600 million a year just for maintenance. So we do need more projects, sure, but we're maintained right now, but they need some more money for new projects as well. Now we have this with these salaries for the judiciary branch. Now we're talking about the major money with education, the potential $2 billion a year for Medicaid expansion. We're all over the board, and the question is, how are we going to pay for it?
And that's been the question, and sadly, if we're returning to the sad old days of being the high tax point on the prairie, which as we've moved away from the Brownback effort at tax reform, I'm afraid that we are going to be a high tax point on the prairie. Or with just about every tax, not necessarily every tax being highest, but if you combine them all together and spending per capita, it's going to make it very problematical going forward. One of the challenges we have, and I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, but it covered something that could affect us in the broadcasting area, was this debacle in Hawaii over the emergency and a false alarm basically put out there.
Sure.
At KQAM, you guys provide storm alerts and so on for emergencies, that sort of thing.
We do.
What sort of protections do we have in place to try and make sure that sort of a Hawaii debacle doesn't happen?
Let me
in
prepare.
Kansas?
There's no nuclear warning that we have for the station. It's going to be okay on that front. No, I mean, what we do is we have our EAS system, obviously, for emergency Amber Alerts and for severe weather, but we also do our own local severe weather as well. What happened there, I don't know. I'm not part of the FCC in that front, so I'm not sure what button was pushed. I understand that person has been taken
well, that was
to
a state employee.
A state employee, exactly.
It wasn't a federal employee.
Exactly.
And it wasn't in the private broadcast side.
Which boggles the mind how some started blaming President Trump, how it was his fault that it went off. I don't know how he could have done that. So, but yeah, it's an unfortunate event. At the same time, the fact that the government tries to continuously take over the EAS and try and be able to push that button and take over all the radio stations, TV stations in the country can be potentially dangerous, because then we could have false alarms, something like that.
Well, on that cheery note, we're going to wrap up this week's edition of Wichita Liberty TV. This is your guest host, Karl Peterjohn, wishing you well, and thank you for watching. And Andy, thank you for being our guest, and stay tuned. We'll be back next week.